All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to The Dream Unfinished. My name is Sarah Overton. This is our second show, and we are talking today a little bit about the mortality rates of Black mothers and infants and Florence Price. So, just a reminder, this is the Dream Unfinished YouTube show. Each episode will air two segments. First, we'll talk about Yet Unheard, a lesser known masterwork by an underrepresented composer, and then we'll have a separate segment which really sheds light or contextualizes the featured selection for today. My name is Sarah Overton. Again, I am the production manager for The Dream Unfinished, and I am here with Un Lee, The Dream Unfinished co-founder and executive director. Today, we're going to speak a little bit about instruments for change. So we'll speak about statistics related to Black maternal and infant mortality rates, and then the initiatives and campaigns that are related to this topic. And also in our Yet Unheard segment, we'll hear a piece by Florence Price called To My Little Son and discuss how these two things relate together. So first, in our Instruments for Change segment, I want to speak very explicitly on some of these facts about Black infant mortality rates in the United States. So in 2018, the infant mortality rate in the United States was 5.7 deaths per 1,000 live births. This is from reporting by the Center for Disease Control, the CDC. More than 21,000 infants died in the US in 2018. And the five leading causes of those infant deaths were birth defects, preterm birth and low birth weight, maternal pregnancy complications, sudden infant death syndrome or SIDS, injuries. And in the CDC study, these infant mortality rates by race and ethnicity were at 10.8% for non-Hispanic Black infants. Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander infants were at 9.4%. American Indian Alaskan Natives were at 8.2%. Hispanic infants were at 4.9%, non-Hispanic white infants at 4.6%, and Asian American infants at 3.6%. And we know now that some of these infant deaths are really considered a part of what we think of as the social determinants of health. So socioeconomic status, education level, employment, occupation, income, they're all fundamental determinants of health factors because they influence other intermediate factors. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that now with the pandemic as well. So, Anne, I wanted to check back in with you after hearing some of those statistics. And really thinking through how these things are affecting our world today and relate to the pandemic. I was wondering if you had any thoughts just kind of on this topic and how TDU is really bringing in some of these ideas into its music making practices.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think that, Sarah, you and I should both offer the disclaimer that at the end of the day, we're classical musicians. So it's not like we're like the end all be all on this topic on any means. But, given that, of course, with COVID, there are these very obvious and blatant health disparity outcomes between different ethnic groups, specifically that unfortunately, people of color, largely Black Americans, are overwhelmingly and disproportionately impacted by COVID. And so we wanted to not only, of course, be present-minded around this because it's obviously very much a part of what is our lived existence right now. But then also, COVID really is, in many ways, a symptom of broader issues. And so, there are health disparity outcomes between different ethnic groups, period. And, I think some of the numbers that you just shared, it's just shocking. Like when you say non-Hispanic Black, the infant mortality rate is 10.8 versus non-Hispanic white 4.6. That literally means that if you're a Black infant, you're twice as likely to, unfortunately, succumb to some kind of illness and mortality rather than if you were in a different population or demographic. And I know that, just anecdotally, this has been something that's very present. I was talking about this week's episode to an old coworker of mine, and, she's a woman of color and she has Black friends. And she said that she's spoken with some of her Black female friends who've said that they're scared to have a child. And then, actually, we have a contact at one of our venues in Queens. I think you were on that call, actually. And he was sharing that the contact for the venue, his wife is a doula. And she's observed so much that, there is this unfortunate and strange and pervasive and persistent stereotype that like Black women can withstand pain at a higher tolerance than other ethnic groups. And with that, that means that often, there have been these very clear sort of symptoms that indicate that, there needs to be some kind of further treatment or care, but that's often been neglected. So unfortunately, I think the numbers bear out when we have been in these sort of informal conversations around this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a really interesting point about Black motherhood and just the maternal mortality rate for Black women, especially. I think the percentage is 37.1 per 100,000 live births, compared with 14.7 for white women. And it's very interesting that you bring up the story of a doula. My mother is a NICU nurse. She works in the neonatal intensive care unit, and this is something that she sees a lot. Unfortunately, and it is something that I've heard my whole life of these stories of how to if in the event you are to get pregnant or you are to have a child, how to kind of speak to a doctor in a way that really conveys if you are in pain or if you're having these complications. There's an extra step there. I think for a lot of Black women who are undergoing this step into motherhood. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I know that we've got a few really great organizations in New York City that we consider instruments for change. When we talk about how we can kind of mitigate, some of these horrific statistics. Can you speak a little bit about some of those?
Yeah, I can definitely jump to those. And for our live Zoom audience, if you don't mind, Sarah, giving me the screen sharing, so then I can pop over and even share some of those websites. So yeah, I mean, of course, I think it's really important for us two non-experts to talk about these, statistics. But then also one of the things that I think is kind of a hallmark of the Dream Unfinished is we try to point people towards resources for how there are different campaigns or initiatives that either they can support or maybe even volunteer and become a part of, or at least certainly be aware of. So we have some New York City-based ones and then also some national initiatives. But let's start with the New York City ones. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. But first, I'm going to get to the right thing. All right, so we have a few organizations that we've just done literally like 15 minutes of Googling, guys. So like if we classical musicians can find this in an internet search, then I'm sure that if you dig a little bit deeper, you can find some things too. But we were really pleased to find at least these 3 New York City-based resources that I think could be super helpful. So this is Somos. And as you can see, it just says it right here. It's a network of 2,500 providers in 4 out of our 5 boroughs, and they come together to ensure better healthcare for Medicaid members. So it's got this whole host of providers that you can be working with. There are also, different informational channels that they're sharing as far as different resources for families. And I think, they have been, if anything, working double time in the COVID pandemic and all of that. So, and not only are they specifically geared towards folks who, are covered by Medicaid, but as you can see, they're making a real effort as far as working across different communities and demographics. So having practitioners who are available to work with patients in a number of different languages. As you can see from that map, I mean, they're really trying to be in areas that need to be that need to have high quality healthcare. So Somos is a great organization, and I hope that folks can be aware of this as a resource for those who do fall under Medicaid. Another group that we found, I think this is the right one. Nope. is, yes, this one. So this one, I believe, is based in Queens, although they just started a branch in Brooklyn, so Strong Children Wellness. And it's specifically around pediatric care. So SOMOS, I think, is more like general family care practitioners, but this is around, young children and young families that are just growing. And they have options for scheduling video and office visits. And obviously that kind of flexibility is really important and practical right now. And there's just a way for folks to be able to have really and like access to medical professionals and guidance and advice in real time. So the fact that this exists in Queens and now Brooklyn, and then of course, as you can see, the providers and the practitioners they reflect the demographics that they're trying to serve. So I think that we're really pleased that there's organizations like this and hope that there are more. And then the last New York City based resource that we wanted to share. So the Queens Library had this amazing, I think it was like 24-hour virtual summit on Black health and healing.
Incredible.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we actually spoke with the folks at the Queens Library who were the organizers shortly after it had happened. And they looked as exhausted as you might imagine, but doing incredible work. And so even though this, as you can see, the dates had already elapsed, it happened a month ago. But if you, I believe if you have a Queens Library card, then and maybe not even, we should double check on that when we upload this link, Sarah. But you can still view the replays. And so, as you can see, I have been able to log in, and all of the talks that were a part of the summit are here for you to view. And there were 3 that were specific to, Black infants and Black mothers. So there was a pediatrician, Dr. Elders, who talked about raising Black children. There was also, and as you can see, as I'm scrolling, there's a ton of different topics here. I mean, today's episode is just around Black mothers and Black infants, but by all means, definitely check this out as a resource for just, healthcare in general. There was also Black breastfeeding, which I thought had a really interesting statistic that I'll be sharing in a little bit, and then also around postpartum. And just to give you a sense of how interesting, and informative that was, like one of the facts that they shared, apparently, Black people have lower breastfeeding rates than other ethnicities in the US. And this really is a kind of public health issue. And in that session that they had in the summit, they also offered specific sort of tips and guidance on how to support breastfeeding or chest feeding mothers. So, if you have a Queens Library card, if you don't, maybe we could help you with a hookup. This is definitely a great resource for people to be checking out. So that's on the New York City side. And then we did just want to share 2 more that are national. Let me go back and get this screen share going. The first, so as everyone knows, we are a 501c3, so we can't actually tell you like how to vote or what to do with your legislator or anything like that, nor will we. We do just want to let you know that there is this Black Maternal Health Momnibus Act. It's actually very new. I think it was just introduced maybe 3 weeks ago, and it is up for vote. So just so you know that it's out there and that it has its own website where you could learn a whole lot more about it. And it's been getting a good amount of press. It's been introduced it was introduced in 2020 initially. And it, I think, just sort of fell through the wayside along with all sorts of other things when COVID hit. But it has been resubmitted very recently by Representative Underwood, Adams, and Senator Cory Booker. So again, we're not going to tell you what to do with this, but just know that it exists. And if you are curious about this topic, then you may very well may be curious about this particular omnibus bill as well. So that's one national resource to be aware of. And then the other is this group called National Birth Equity Collaborative. And so, I think it's somewhat similar as far as the New York City-based organizations that we've had, except it is, of course, working across the country. And it's really specifically geared towards, SOMOS and Strong Children Wellness were more sort of generally geared towards people of color, whereas this birth equity, this group is based primarily towards serving Black maternal and infant health. So we will definitely be dropping all of these links into the videos afterwards so that you are aware of these resources and can do a little bit more of your own digging and looking around. But that's where we are as far as instruments for change, the stats about these issues, and then some ways in which you can actually get involved yourselves.
Yeah, thanks so much for those resources. And like you said, we'll be dropping these links in the chat for anybody interested in this topic, and who wants to learn more and think more critically about these issues as well. And what I love too about these instruments for change, it's not just about the statistics. We recognize that the statistics are the root of this issue, and they're very much here to help the individual person going through these individual things. And it's so encouraging that these resources are out there. So again, we'll be dropping these links in the chat, and we'll have those for you to look at. So it's really great to be aware of these initiatives and resources. And like you said, one of the hallmarks of TDU is to pair information like what we shared with music and narrative to kind of motivate people to take action, and to really invest in some of these wonderful things that are out there. So and kind of unfortunately apt musical segment or selection to align with today's topic is an art song by Florence Price. So Florence Price is a composer a classical composer, had two daughters and one son. And the son died in infancy. Price was heartbroken and composed this piece, "To My Little Son," in remembrance of him. So a little bit more about this. It's a beautiful song published and set to a poem by Julia Johnson Davis, and it was published initially through Classical Vocal Reprints in 2010, called 5 Art Songs, as well as 44 Art Songs and Spirituals. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about this piece and kind of Florence Price's relationship to the issue, and how she used music to kind of work through some of this unimaginable grief.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think before we dive into the particular art song, we can share a little bit more about Price. She's become, in classical music circles, I would say in the last couple of years, very much a household name. But for folks who may not be aware of who she is, I think we can talk a bit more about her biography. And then also, like we did in our last episode, share just some vocab terms before we get nitty gritty and granular with the piece itself. And Sarah, I would love for you to help fill in the sort of gaps as far as Florence Price's bio. But I would say, in summary, she's considered the first Black female composer to have a piece premiered and performed by a major symphony orchestra. That's sort of how her claim to fame has been put down in the books. Would you say? Oh, Sarah, are you still there?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, it was frozen just for a second.
Little internet blip.
No worries. So I was just saying that Price, her sort of claim to fame is that she's known as the first Black female composer to have a work premiered or performed by a major symphony orchestra. And what other details would you share as far as, like, if people needed a summary of who she is and why she's important?
Yeah, Price, she was a pianist and an organist, as well as a composer, and composed over 300 works, symphonies and chamber works, really lush lyrical pieces, performed, like you said, by leading orchestras and performers, The Chicago Symphony performed her works, and Marian Anderson performed some of her works. So it's really interesting how she's just kind of remained on the fringes of classical music while also really being at the center of it, especially being such a prolific composer.
Mm-hmm.
She is just one of many female composers who, often get overlooked. So, she was a classmate of William Grant Still. She was from a family that was musical as well. So just grew up around a lot of music. I think kind of had the typical composer upbringing, the typical composer origin story. I think of Bach, growing up in a very family, and Price really did very much of the same. So it's interesting, those parallels to the composers that we immediately think of when we think of composers, and kind of how this gets overlooked despite the similarities. So I think Florence Price is very exciting. I love, like I said, just the lush richness of her music, and I think To My Little Son is really no exception.
Yeah, no, of course. And there's actually a really great WQXR musical biography that features Price by Terrence McKnight, which we can drop into the links afterwards. I think this is apocryphal a bit, although I think it is actually mentioned in the QXR piece. But, as you're just saying about her upbringing and how she really grew up in a house of culture. So I believe her parents were actually, pretty well off. It was in a town in Arkansas, I believe, and her father was a dentist, and at the time he was a Black dentist, of course, but he apparently his practice was well reputed enough where he even had some white patients, which I guess is some indication as far as like how they were sort of positioned in the community. And they would have these salon style evenings where, important speakers and politicians who were kind of coming through the area would be hosted by them to do these, these, I guess, like almost sort of salons essentially where they were, sharing on some different sort of topic with the Black intelligentsia of the community. And I think most notably, it was something like a very young Florence Price playing piano for Frederick Douglass, or like something.
I didn't know that. That's so exciting. It reminds me a lot of, like Schubertiads and also kind of like the salons that Margaret Bonds used to hold.
Exactly.
So it's very interesting to see those parallels kind of come and have that interplay.
Yeah. And for folks who don't know, so Bonds is also a pretty pivotal, I would say, Black female composer who actually, I'm not sure, Sarah, if you knew of her relationship with Florence Price, but Bonds was, I believe, a little bit younger than Price. And at one point, Price had written like her piano concerto. And I believe Bonds was actually the musician who premiered it when it was performed. And they were also, I think this was when Price had gotten divorced. And, so especially in that time in the US, being a single mother, particularly a single Black mother, I think was enormously challenging. And I think she like moved in with Bonds, and like there's some story of Margaret Bonds actually like engraving the orchestra parts for Florence Price ahead of one of these really big symphonic premieres. So they were actually quite close. And it's interesting when you think of these different figures in history and how they actually had links and sort of ties, and that you can connect the dots between them. So yeah, I mean, I think there's, as Florence Price has become much more popular in the last couple of years by certainly classical music organizations and symphony orchestras. I think even that sort of trending is worth a separate episode that we could have at some point. But it's as much sort of radio play as she's getting. Not a lot of people know this detail as far as this child that she had who passed away in infancy. So as you were saying, that she had this son, and I'm going to go ahead and, or actually, I keep getting ahead of myself. First, we should talk about the terms that we're going to be sort of sharing back and forth as we're talking about this piece. So the first is diatonic, and actually, should I do this? Maybe I'll do this. Okay. Thank goodness it's a plastic reed, so I don't have to get it wet. Yes. So a diatonic scale, or diatonic notes, I should say, is when you have some kind of as I think for non-musicians, like do, re, mi, fa, so, like you have that scale. But then when you say non-diatonic, then if everyone's thinking of their prefixes, you're finding some sort of note or some sort of chord or something that doesn't fit into that scale. So like that kind of makes you wince or cringe or something, right? Because it's not what is sort of expected. So she uses some non-diatonic harmony in this piece. And she uses it to do something called text painting. Text painting, I was looking up like the official definitions for this, but Sarah, if you can fill this in more, if you think that there's a better way to flesh it out. But in musical terms, text painting is often when there's some sort of piece with text, with lyrics, and there's some kind of musical element that's being used to illustrate that. Like I think probably the best known example that I can think of is like Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony, when there's like all of the little sorts of cues that are supposed to sound like a shepherd's call or like bird song or things like that. I mean, what are some other examples of text painting that you can think of, Sarah, if any?
Yeah, I think the Witches' Sabbath from Hector Berlioz's, I think that's probably a good example of more programmatic music, really, than text painting. But I know with Price and just kind of setting this music to poetry, it's more about how she draws out just kind of the words and dreams and makes different musical statements based on, kind of what's going on within the poem. So she might make a different musical statement on one line, make a harmonic shift in a different place, like you said, introduce new accidentals. By the way, I love the clarinet demonstration. Very exciting. And add an arpeggio or a chord in a different key or something, a non-chord tone, right, non-diatonic note. So yeah, that's how I think of text painting.
Sarah, that was so graceful of you. I just realized that my Beethoven example is not text painting because there's no text. And you so gently steered me away from that. This is a live show, everyone. Well, no, and what are some other examples of actual text painting? I guess so Schubert is certainly known for it, right? Like there's Gretchen at the Spinning Wheel, which is a really, it's a piece that really sorts of draws you into the story, and the way that that in that particular piece, like the piano has these like running like dun, 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 like and it makes you sort of feel as if you're with her as she's ramping up at the spinning wheel. And then I would say that there are probably, I live under a rock, so I don't know enough sort of contemporary artists, but like text painting is not something that's unique to classical music. Like there are certainly more living popular artists that employ this, where basically it's just using the music to draw attention towards and really illustrate something that's happening in the lyrics. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I wanted to go ahead and first share the actual text that Price is painting, and get to, let's see. Yeah, too many tabs. Okay, here we go. So this is the original poem by this poet, Julia Johnson Davis. And one thing that folks should know too in classical music is that often when a composer does a setting of text of a poem like this, they will often take liberties a little bit, as far as sometimes repeating words, repeating lines, sometimes omitting lines, just so that it sort of fits into the music a little bit more closely. In Price's example for this particular art song, she actually pretty much preserves the poem as is. The one thing that she does do is this third line, "and eager, dream of what my son will be." She repeats this a second time. But other than that, it is actually exactly as the poem is written. And I was not able to find the exact history with all of this, but from my understanding, her son passed away, and then she came across this poem and then decided to create this musical composition. And as you can read from the text, this is actually a really beautiful poem in that it's very symmetrical. There's this this first section where this mother is gazing at her infant son and seeing trying to imagine the man that he's going to become, dreaming of who her son will become as 20 years pass. And then she's then imagining when he is this man who has fully grown, then is she going to go backwards and try to imagine back to the face of the infant that she's gazing on with initially. And Price, not only does she match this symmetry in terms of the music, but you'll hear with these non-diatonic, with these sort of surprising chords that she introduces, how specifically she does a lot of this text painting around the word dream and around the word wistful. So we have this great, and again, similar to the David Baker piece that we shared last week, there's not very many recordings of this. On YouTube, as far as we could find, I think there are 4 YouTube videos of this. And this is actually a very familiar face for TDU audiences. So Terrence McKnight is the accompanist in this particular video. And for those who don't know, Terrence has been the host of our live events since our founding in 2015. So we're going to hear a little bit. It's a short piece, as you can see, only a minute and a half. We'll hear just a little bit of it because if you want to hear the full thing, you should go to WQXR's website. But let's hear that first half where she's imagining of that man that her son will become.
Your face I sometimes see, shadowing of a man to be, and again, dreams of what my son shall be, dreams of what my son shall be.
So we'll just hear a taste of it because, again, you should go to QXR's website instead of watching it from our live stream. But Sarah, I'm curious your thoughts.
Oh my goodness! Actually, that's the first time that I've heard Terrence play piano. So that was a little treat for me, and a wonderful job by Aaron Flannery as well. I think that just kind of these very pianistic flourishes, really indicative of her background as a pianist herself, and just kind of the way that she utilized some of these emotions and captured a lot of what I could only imagine is just some of the horrific, just kind of madness and grief that you go through after losing a child in that way.
Yeah.
I think that the combination of those two things, just kind of the flourishes and the depth of the piano and the way that Aaron Flannery's voice sort of conveyed some of this grief was just beautiful, just really lush, a lot of textures there.
Yeah. And was, as we were saying earlier, as far as the text painting, so when you hear that pianistic flourish and it kind of takes you into a different key or a different harmony, at least very briefly, and that's dwelling on that word dream. And then not only does it happen musically, but then it happens in terms of the harmony, but then that was the one instance where she chose to take some liberties with the text and then repeat it. And I think, as exactly as you're saying, like how much more poignant and frankly heartbreaking it is, where, in the poem, it's dream of what my son will be. And it's supposed to be from the vantage of a mother who is eagerly awaiting to watch her son grow up. But here it's dream of what my son, in her instance, who her son did not have the opportunity to be. And so really just, I think this is one of those sorts of powerful things as far as being an artist, that for those who have the wherewithal, that they're able to process tragedies and have it come through in terms of something that then can be out into the world and hopefully touching other people and moving other people.
Absolutely, absolutely agree. It's really this. She put together this very moving form, heartbreaking, like you said, of musical storytelling. The music has its own language to tell what she's going through, along with the text, and the two combined are just poignant and powerful. Really,
Yeah.
really, really incredible.
Yeah. So we'll definitely also drop the link to that QXR video so that folks can enjoy the full piece, and hopefully revisit it again and again. And, as we really hope that this music touches people. We hope that it leaves you inspired to learn more about, how you too can become involved in these sorts of issues, and how we can collectively be working on really correcting these current statistics that exist in terms of these mortality rates. So, I think really that music sort of says it all for what we needed to be saying, right? So I think, unless Sarah, you have anything else, I think we're going to leave it here.
No, I think that's it. And thank you for a wonderful discussion of Florence Price and her life and her music. And, again, we're going to drop all of those useful Instrument for Change links on our page and everywhere that we can, just to really remind us of how we can use these things, use music as an instrument for change, and be useful to these resources, and use them for the people that we love, and keep them close. So thanks again for tuning in. Next week's episode, we'll be talking a little bit more around the origin story of The Dream Unfinished. And I can't wait to chat with you about that, and the origin of our ensemble's name. So we look forward to speaking with you all again. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, please feel free to comment on our YouTube page. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and make sure that you are here next week as we discuss the origin story of The Dream Unfinished, and get back into classical music